You're watching The Legal Breakdown. All right, Glenn, so we're in the immediate aftermath of Donald Trump having been found guilty on all 34 counts. I want to do a little thought experiment here because there are a lot of potential issues that could arise. Obviously, Donald Trump is running to be the next president of the United States. A major question that I've gotten from our viewers is what happens in the event that Donald Trump wins the election and yet is sentenced to some period of incarceration in this New York trial? What could happen if he disregards his sentence, for example?
Brian, in dictatorships, he with the most military power wins. That is the sad reality of dictatorships through time all around the world. If Donald Trump wins, he has already told us he will be a dictator on day one. Do you really believe a dictator is going to abide by a sentence, particularly a sentence to incarceration that was imposed by these, meddling little courts that are so far beneath him that they're really not worthy of his respect? He with the most military might wins if you live in a dictatorship. Let's hope we never get there, because if Donald Trump wins in 2024, any cases that have yet to be tried, and we've only tried one of his 4 criminal cases, any cases that have yet to be tried will go away. If they're federal cases, Donald Trump will appoint yet another corrupt attorney general to weaponize the Department of Justice and make sure his federal cases are dismissed. He will also argue to any court still willing to entertain the legal arguments of a dictator. It's a whole nother question for us to tackle. He will then argue that the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says that a state can't prosecute a sitting president while in office. That is not, let me fully inform our viewers, that is not what the Supremacy Clause of the United States says, but that is what he will argue. And I'll put my full buck, Brian, on Donald Trump getting rid of all of his pending criminal cases and successfully avoiding whatever sentence he has been ordered to serve in connection with his New York conviction on 34 felony counts. And we will then be living in a dictatorship, an autocracy, a tyrant like Donald Trump.
We have a lot of international viewers and a lot of domestic viewers who don't understand, the process here, and that is, will Trump's conviction and his impending sentence have any impact on his ability to run for office? So can you just speak to that for a moment? Because I think, the answer is, of course, no, that it won't have any impact on his ability to run for office. But can you kind of explain that? Because for a lot of folks, they can't understand how somebody could be both sitting in a jail cell and also eligible to not only run, but win the presidency.
I can't understand it either, but let me try to explain it. What Donald Trump has done, Brian, is he has exposed the weak spots in our Constitution and in our system of government. It is folly, and that's a nice word for it, to entertain the notion that someone who is a convicted felon, indeed someone who may be serving a prison term, can still run for the presidency and can actually be president of the United States and serve from a jail cell. Of course, he would find a way to use, the military might of the U.S. to break him out of jail or somehow negate his sentence. Of that, I am convinced. But there is no prohibition in the Constitution or in any of our nation's laws that says a convicted felon can't be president. Convicted felons lose all kinds of rights: the right to vote, the right to possess firearms under certain circumstances. They certainly will lose the right or the opportunity to hold security clearances, to be a government clerk, to do any number of things, but a convicted felon can serve as president. So I can't explain that in a way that it makes sense to our friends here or abroad. But what it's a weak spot in our Constitution and our system of government that Donald Trump exposed, and that I hope we pay attention to and try to find ways to make inroads on fixing it.
Well, there are just 3 prohibitions to being able to run for president if you're under 35 years old, if you weren't a natural-born citizen. And ironically enough, the last one is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. If you've engaged in or given aid or comfort to those who've engaged in insurrection. And Donald Trump actually did that. And we've spoken in a previous video about how he was adjudicated as an insurrectionist, both by Judge Wallace, I believe, in California, as well as another judge in Colorado, up through the appeals court, and then the Colorado Supreme Court affirmed that decision. So, barring the fact that we have a very far-right aligned Supreme Court that is too impotent to actually, check any of Donald Trump's powers, he has been adjudicated to be an insurrectionist, and yet, that still hasn't stopped him either.
And that is such an important reminder. Donald Trump, as we sit here, is disqualified under the express terms of the Constitution from serving in any office. Why? Because he took an oath to support the Constitution of the United States as president, and he thereafter engaged in insurrection as both a trial court and a state Supreme Court found. So he is disqualified. I hate talking about these issues, especially in tandem. Why? Because I just said we had weak spots in the Constitution that allow a convicted felon to be president. We actually have strong spots in the Constitution that say anybody who engages in insurrection is disqualified from holding any office, including federal office, and yet our Supreme Court decided to do Donald Trump an enormous favor, though, and say, we don't care. We don't care that he's an adjudicated insurrectionist. We think basically there would be so much upheaval, and I'm taking liberties with their rationale, but they refused to apply the express words in the Constitution, and the justices on the right are always saying they're strict, strict constructionists,
right? Yeah.
Textualists, and if the words say it, we're duty bound to apply it, unless it's Donald Trump. Then we're going to do him a favor. Listen, we are a government stood on its head right now, Brian, and I hope we can pull ourselves up out of the deep hole in which Donald Trump and his Republican supporters have put us. The good news is we're a resilient people. We're a resilient country. We've been down before, but we've never been out. And I think we're going to rally this time too. And I ultimately believe that these 34 felony convictions will hurt him at the polls. And I don't think he will be reelected. But if he is, then it's Katie bar the door, because we don't have much hope but that we'll be living in a dictatorship.
So just two responses here. I know that, some folks are going to watch this video and feel a sense of despair, but I think it's important that we do these thought experiments, because the last thing we want, which is what happened after the first Trump term, is to be left unprepared for anything. And so I think it's important, especially knowing what the lengths that Donald Trump will go to protect or entrench his own power. It's important that we talk about all of this stuff so that none of us are left kind of on our heels when Donald Trump does whatever it is he tries to do. So that's the first thing. The second is just a reminder, and this is something that Glenn and I have spoken about in just about all of our episodes of Legal Breakdown. It is not up to the courts to save us. It's not up to prosecutors or lawyers or anybody else to save us. The real test of whether our democracy holds is going to be on November 5th. And so that's just, a reminder to everybody out there. We all have agency here. We all have family and friends, neighbors and coworkers who we can make sure to get involved, to stay engaged, to know what's happening, to be well informed about everything that's going on. And so, this is all of our jobs, to go out there and make sure that our circles of people are prepared to cast their ballots, especially folks who may not have voted in 2020, who don't pay attention to politics, who think that the whole system is rigged. But those people, when they abstain from voting because they think the system is rigged, they actually hand a win to those very people whose goal it is to rig it. And so, this is going to be a group effort right now, and that's why Glenn and I do what we do, and that's hopefully the takeaway that you're all going to have from watching this.
Yeah, Brian, and we say it all the time that we have to get out in numbers too big to rig and too real to steal, because we are the ones who are going to save us from a dictatorship and an autocracy. And let me just put an exclamation point to finish up on the conversation we had about whether a convicted felon can be president. The sentencing date in Donald Trump's case is set for July 11th. There's a very realistic possibility that he will be sentenced to a period of incarceration and that he will be ordered to start his sentence. 4 days later, the Republican convention. This is going to sound like a scene from a comedy, but stay with me here for a minute. Donald Trump could be sitting in a visiting room in a detention facility behind plexiglass, holding that, prison phone to his ear saying, I hereby accept the nomination of the Republican. Hey, Warden, give me a minute here. I'm accepting a nomination. I hereby accept. I know it sounds like a comedy skit, but it is deadly serious. And that's why we have to make sure that doesn't happen by getting to the polls and making our voices heard.
We'll leave it there. For those watching right now, if you want to follow along with everything that happens as it relates to this case, sentencing, appeals, everything moving forward, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. That's the best way to support what we do, by going ahead and subscribing. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.